Welcome to the creation of joy. This is chapter 4. We are talking about our brain and our mind. I guess you know where I am and who am I now. So what we going to discuss today is how wonderful our mind and our brain and the way it's structured. So the previous chapter we discussed the limitation of our mind, and I think this is quite easy to understand. But how wonderful and what our mind can achieve is something totally different. So my personal opinion is that every person on Earth, from at the moment we estimate 7.8 billion people, has a talent. However, the vast majority of the people never had the opportunity or the access to understand their talent. Just very, very few people. Most people measure talent in a very limited way, like IQ and few other subjects, and they missing a lot. And my idea is that we can actually give much better opportunities to people if they understand the way that their mind is structured. So if you, for example, imagine our mind is the size of the pool behind me, then our conscience is only a few percent. In fact, everybody say that we only using a small percentage of our mind. Some people say 3%, some people say 10 or 20%. The reality is that we don't know, but we do know that it's a very small part. So for the purpose of our discussion, we imagine our mind to be the size of the pool behind me, and our conscience is only the size of a glass of water. That's how small it is. The probability that it's something resemble that is quite high, because we know from people that have multiple personalities, some of them have many personalities, and in fact each personality can be very deep. So it means that in one mind you have many different people, and still you need to leave space for everything else. My personal opinion is actually that we are using all of our mind, but in a way that we don't normally think of. So, for example, the body, our physique, use a big part of our mind. So we know that a lot of functions inside of us, in our internal organs, are actually controlled by our brain, and they cannot work if the brain is not working properly. Obviously, our conscience. What we forgot is that our subconscious, which is the largest part of our mind, is actually receiving everything that our conscious receive. So we see things, we smell things, we hear things, we get it into our conscience, but in parallel it goes into our subconscious. What's happening in our subconscious, that it stays there and it's being processed. And normally when we sleep, we have situation in our subconscious, and sometimes we are aware of them. We call them dreams. The dreams are based on the input that we had throughout the day, throughout our history, and what really moves us in life is things like pleasure, pain, taste, smell, everything that we get through our senses, and everything we hear. And here comes the imagination, hear and see. And this is the unique part of humanity, that the size of our imagination is and the capability is bigger than anything else. Our conscience is actually driven by our subconscious. So, for example, a lot of things in our daily order is being influenced by our subconscious. So, for example, we get angry from something. It's actually our conscience is overwhelmed by our subconscious. Lots of information comes from different places in our subconscious, and suddenly we feel angry. Why we feel angry, it's very interesting to analyze it. Obviously, a lot of information and various different things are loaded, and we expect or hope or persuaded that something have to happen in a certain way, and when it doesn't, then anger triggered. Other very overwhelming feeling, taste, pleasure, and very, very important, jealousy. Jealousy is a human nature, and it links to a lot of different part of our personality. Ego is a very, very big part of it. And jealousy trigger, anger trigger, hatred, it mostly happen in our subconscious. Occasionally it's happening in our conscience, but even if it's happening in our conscience, very few people will admit to it. Of course, when it happens in our subconscious, mostly we are not able to admit to. So the relationship between our conscious and our subconscious is very important. And when we understand that most of our decisions and our ambitions and our hopes and aspirations are actually driven by emotions that are triggered and overwhelm us via our subconscious, we are able to translate and trace it back to what instigated them and then improve ourselves. So this is an incredibly interesting area, and in fact this is the most interesting part of the mind because it's like a huge maze and it's endless, and we know that it's a big part of the 50 trillion cells of our body, and it's the most interesting part for sure because it controls and gets input from everything. Obviously we feel very small part of it. The reason that we feel small part of it is in order for us to be able to function and come to where we are at the moment. So in the next chapters, we're going to talk about various different things in our history and ideologies. And when we understand how our mind think and the limitation of our mind, it'll be easier for us to understand the limitations and the flaws of various ideologies versus our life today and as we so quickly at the moment evolving. Thank you for joining me, and I'm looking forward to see you at the next chapter. Thank you.